Jeff, good morning. And I am Janet Tippett with CBRE and chair of this year's BOMA Greater Dallas Government Affairs Committee. I am thrilled to welcome you to this morning's virtual coffee and chat with the Government Affairs Committee. Advocacy is one of BOMA Greater Dallas's three pillars, and it all starts with the Government Affairs Committee. GAC represents you at the local, state, and national levels, ensuring that the voice of commercial real estate is heard loud and clear. Most recently, we participated in some outstanding meetings with officials from the cities of Dallas, Plano, Richardson, and McKinney, and we have more meetings planned in the coming weeks. A big thank you to everyone in our GAC members and our BOMA members for participating in this Advocacy Week. Another charge of GAC is to educate BOMA Greater Dallas members about relevant issues that impact the CRE industry. That happened in February 2021 when Winter Storm Uri wreaked havoc across Texas, causing major disruptions to the natural gas and power generation systems. Many power generation companies, retail electric providers or REPs, and even electric municipalities and cooperatives suffered major losses, some going into bankruptcy proceedings. In response, legislators and regulators made major changes to the ERCOT or Texas market. Some changes were meant to address the direct financial results, while others attempted to change ERCOT's operations to prevent a similar event from happening in the future. Because of these changes, REPs will take action soon that will result in cost increases that will be passed on to end user customers, including the commercial real estate community. Today's coffee and chat topic will be Texas-sized energy reform, and we are so excited to have two leading experts from BOMA Greater Dallas Allied Member 5 to explain what this all means. But before I introduce our two featured speakers, I have a few quick announcements. Tomorrow, we will have a special workshop called Difficult Conversations at 11:30 a.m. at Douglas Center. The program is part of our BOMA Greater Dallas Building Leaders, but we've opened it to emerging professionals and BOMA real estate members. A reminder that the next BOMA Greater Dallas member luncheon is next Tuesday, March 15th, at Prestonwood Country Club. Henry Chamberlain, President and COO for BOMA International, is the featured speaker. New BOMA Greater Dallas President Jacqueline Bird will give her welcome address and will recognize outgoing and current board members and committee leaders. Join us for the new member orientation at 10:30 a.m., followed by networking, lunch, and the program. You don't want to miss this. It'll be a great meeting and luncheon. Also, next week is our Work-Life Balance Seminar with Stevie Dawn on Thursday, March 17th at 7:30 a.m., also at Douglas Center. Aside from getting valuable information, you can also get your professional headshot taken for free. After being postponed twice because of winter storms, the dart tournament is finally happening on Thursday, March 24th at Gilley's, Dallas. There's still space for teams, and you can register as a spectator. Later this month, BOMA Greater Dallas MOB Committee is hosting the State of the Healthcare Market on Wednesday, March 30th at the 3 Lincoln Center. We've assembled some terrific panelists, so if you are on the medical side or want to learn more, you don't want to miss this meeting. Lastly, remember that BOMA Greater Dallas is hosting the 2022 BOMA Southwest Region Conference on April 6th through 9th at the Hilton Granite Park in Plano. This conference has everything. More than a dozen education sessions, including TREC Legal 1 and 2, the BOMA Ethics and Instructor Training courses, the opening party at the Star, golf tournament at the Cowboys Club, the regional Toby Awards dinner, and more. Visit the BOMA Greater Dallas website to register and book your hotel room today. You can register and get info on all of these events on our BOMA Greater Dallas website or reach out to the office. Now, let me tell you about our speakers. Ben Manna is a senior energy advisor with Five. Ben began his energy career in 2008, and in his current role, he serves commercial real estate properties across North Texas, North America and assist building owners to reduce their expenses and increase the energy efficiency of their operations. He also helps to identify opportunities to reduce their carbon footprint through sustainability initiatives. Eric Fretcher is the lead market analyst and senior Zoltar for Five. Eric has worked in the deregulated energy market since 2002 and has tremendous experience in data analytics, pricing, load forecasting, and strategy development. In his current role, Eric advises clients and team members on product structuring and operational solutions. Today's program is sponsored by Five and is being recorded if you want to revisit the content or share it with your colleagues. If you have a question for Ben or Eric, please type it in the Q&A box, and your question will be answered. Ben, Eric, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Janet. Really appreciate the intro and excited about all the events coming up with BOMA. A big thank you to the Government Affairs Committee and to BOMA Dallas for allowing us to do this. I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions about what's going on, what all these letters in the mail mean from your rep. We hope to cover all that and more today. Eric has a few slides that he's going to share to hopefully answer some of your initial questions. And then we'll even get into a little bit about what's going on globally with the impact the unfortunate war in Ukraine's having on energy markets, not only across the world, but here domestically too. So again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in that Q&A section there, and we'll absolutely make time at the end of this to answer some questions you have. But Eric, thanks for being with us today, man. I really appreciate you doing this. And yeah, let's get started here.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for the intros. I'm going to jump in and talk about a lot of the regulatory changes, like Ben introduced, what's going on in Texas and how that's impacting a lot of the changes in the ERCOT market, and then talk a little bit about what's going on internationally, geopolitically, because it is having such a massive impact on all energy, and then wrap it up at the end on how you have the combination of a very volatile energy market and a change in the ERCOT power market and what all that's doing to Texas electricity markets in the forwards and in the spot market. So we'll jump in, talk about first just the major market changes in ERCOT post Winter Storm Uri. So rolling back the videotape, and this will kind of be walking through chronologically, so you can kind of, it makes more sense if I go chronologically. There have been a decent amount of operational changes at ERCOT post Winter Storm Uri. The first started right in the middle of last summer. And if you roll back the videotape a little bit in your mind, we had just exited a crazy winter. There were still conversations about whose fault was it, about what happened in February. The whole board of the Public Utility Commission was dismissed. So all the PUC commissioners were fired. The half of the ERCOT board was let go, along with the CEO and president of ERCOT. And then in June, we had 5 days of regular June weather, but just because of the way the ERCOT grid was kind of stacking up and the lack of generation on those days, we had some significant scarcity warnings, meaning ERCOT was reaching out and saying, hey, there's a decent chance of scarcity in these afternoons, please curtail. And it just kicked off a major political storm, a call to action, if you will, that kick off a series of events that led to some significant changes in July. So what happened was the powers that be in Austin reached out to the Public Utility Commission, which dictated to ERCOT of, you can't allow this to happen. We're not going to sit back and just allow you to make warnings when it got to 92 degrees in North Texas on we may not have enough power generation, everybody should curtail. It just doesn't look good for all kinds of political reasons for that to happen right after a couple months prior we had rolling blackouts, right? So there's not a whole lot of things that ERCOT can do in a deregulated market in the short term to all of a sudden make the system more secure. The one thing they can do is reach out and ask for additional reserves. So in July, ERCOT dramatically changed how many spinning and non-spinning reserves they were procuring on a daily and hourly basis. I know it's a lot of that could be some possible new words about what is a spinning and non-spinning reserves. You can think of these as the second and third string players on a football team. If you're in the ERCOT market, an analogy would be the ERCOT generation in Texas is the players in a football team. You pay players that are in the game all the time, but you also pay players to stand on the sidelines. You're hiring more than 11 players to play the game. You have people that specialize in offense or defense, and you have people that just stand on the sidelines in case they need to be called into the game. Spinning reserves, in that analogy of a football team, would be the second string players, probably a second string quarterback, second string linebacker, et cetera. It's the guys that are very likely to be put into the game if anything happens to any of the starters. The non-spinning reserves are typically the third and fourth string guys. They are traditionally, you didn't procure a whole lot of them. And by its nature, it's not spinning. It's not consuming fuel to be a reserve. It's just sitting on the sideline ready. So it would be the equivalent of the third string quarterback that doesn't have his helmet on, probably has his shoulder pads, may know the plays, but isn't ready to get into the game in a short time. ERCOT went to the market and said, we're not having enough of this buffer of reserve players on the bench. So ERCOT, you need to go and procure a significant more amount of those. What that meant to the market when ERCOT said, all right, PUC, we're going to do what you say, we're going to go out and find some more third and fourth string quarterbacks to always have them on the bench. That increased cost for just the second half of last year was about $250 million for that increased quantity. All of that was passed on to the suppliers, the retail electric providers that was serving all of our load for the balance of last year. But the PUC also said, we're not going to allow any of you suppliers to pass on this additional cost, this additional $250 million to any residential or small commercial customers that were already in a fixed price. Because fixed means fixed, supposedly, as far as the PUC goes. So we're going to burden you with this $250 million on top of everything that happened in Uri, but you can't pass it along to residential and small commercial, which meant that most of these suppliers have decided that if they can't pass it on to a significant portion of their books, they are going to have to pass it along to the large commercial customers, the ones that the contract allows for change in law to be passed through. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now as far as where they've decided to do these. And all of the big suppliers, the names that you know and love, have already been studying this since last summer. And most of them this winter, when it transitioned from last year's protocol, the 2021 protocol, to the 2022 protocol in ERCOT, decided that since this change wasn't being rolled back for calendar year 2022, they're going to start enacting that right in their contract to start passing these costs through. Some of the suppliers have decided to retroactively pass this cost through. So they went back and said, for all of your usage from July through December, we're going to pass through this big chunk of cost to you. Some of them just decided from now on, for all contracts that were signed prior to this being enacted in last summer, we're just going to start passing through cost. There isn't many suppliers in the market that have decided to not do this. This chart kind of gives a sense of the order of magnitude of what that change was. The teal is kind of the quantity on the average of additional reserves that we were procuring on an hourly basis, which is about 1,500 megawatts per hour for the beginning half of the year. And then you could see in July that jumped up to about 3,500, so 2.5 times as much. And then September, October, November jumped up to 4.5 to 5,000, with the more constraint days being 5, 6, 7, 8,000 megawatts of reserves of backup quarterbacks. So if we used to have 1.5 backup quarterbacks, now we're having 5 or 6 backup quarterbacks on the bench at all times. So that's a pretty significant increase in cost. Again, in 2021, just the second half of 2021, it was about $250 million that suppliers will be passing through. That equates on $1 per megawatt hour basis to about $1 to $1.50 per megawatt hour for all customers last year. So if a supplier can only pass that through to half of their book because the other half is residential and commercial, and their average profit margin for serving a commercial customer is probably less than the $1 to $1.50 that this additional cost is, they really can't just stomach it and not pass it through. So the vast majority of them had decided to pass this through. So that's the biggest change post the middle of last year that ERCOT made in kind of a knee-jerk reaction on the changing in the quantity of reserves that they were buying on a daily and hourly basis, starting in last July, continuing as we go through 2022. The second major change that ERCOT had was post Winter Storm Uri was a changing and a lowering of the system-wide offer cap. And the system-wide offer cap is just a fancy word for the highest price that a generator can get paid for wholesale electricity. Previous to or during Winter Storm Uri, that price was $9,000 per megawatt hour. And so when there is scarcity, there's a mechanism in ERCOT that lifts the price up to $9,000. It's called the ORDC, or the Operational Reserve Demand Curve. We're not going to get into how it works. It's just a lot of mathematics. But it's essentially a mechanism that lifts prices as reserve margins decrease. So this blue line was the previous demand curve, and as reserves or your backup quarterbacks are being depleted, the prices in the market get added until it gets $9,000, and then it just stays there. Once reserve margins get down to what was just over 2,000 megawatts. This $9,000 cap starting in January of this year was reduced to $5,000. There was a lot of conversations at the second half of 2021 with the market and the Public Utility Commission of what is a right number if 9,000 was too expensive during Winter Storm Uri. And the market, or at least the Public Utility Commissioners, decided 5,000 was the best middle ground. But you can't in a market just lower the total amount of dollars that a generator can get paid on the days where there is actually congestion, so the most volatile days, without changing the supply demand curve, the economic demand curve of the generation stack dramatically. So in order to still try to incentivize new generation to be built in Texas and not just reduce a massive amount of revenue out of the system, the Public Utility Commission agreed to lower the cap to $5,000, but to shift that curve or increase the speed in which prices get to $5,000 and increase the frequency. So before, if there was a day or an hour that reserves got down to $4,000, 4,000 megawatts of backup reserves, the price adder was relatively small. Now, if we get to 4,000 megawatts of reserves, or the equivalent of 4 backup quarterbacks in the previous example, the price already hits $5,000 and stays there regardless of how much reserves decrease. So all in all, lower the impact of any 1 hour's pricing event, but dramatically increasing the frequency and the duration of these pricing events. So that's probably the biggest change in the wholesale market. Those two biggest changes last year that have started prior to 2022 is the amount of reserves that they're buying on an hourly basis, and how fast the cap can start to rise, how fast the real-time price can start to rise to that cap with a higher frequency. So those are the major operational changes. The previous one, the changes in ancillary services, is absolutely a change in law that is not hedged, or wasn't a cost that the suppliers could hedge prior to you signing the contract. So they're passing through that cost for the vast majority of commercial contracts. This change in the ORDC curve really doesn't impact their non-hedgeable cost. It really just changes the price in the forward markets and how volatile the real-time market is, which is covered for most fixed price contracts. So this change, this change in the system-wide offer cap, isn't really going to have a pass through to your cost. It is going to change the volatility of the underlying market. So those are the two big operational changes. The third big thing that was a major change last year was a pass by the House, the Senate, and then signed into law on just how the state is planning on financing a lot of the debt that was created by Winter Storm Uri. So House Bill 4492 is probably one that's most applicable to the deregulated electricity market, and it breaks up about $3 billion worth of costs that were stranded in the market and creates a financial instrument. Basically, the state is going out and selling a bunch of bonds, using those bonds to pay back the dollars that they owe for Winter Storm Uri, and then financing those bonds over 30 years. And the payment of those bonds are being uplifted to retail electric providers, which means they will be uplifted to us, the people that are actually buying electricity from load. And it's broken up into basically two different pieces. There's an $800 million that are for the payments of just people that defaulted on their payments to ERCOT. And then there's about $2 to $2.1 billion that are reserved for all the wholesale prices for energy and ancillary services during the week of Winter Storm Uri that were above $9,000. Now, we just talked about the cap for energy was $9,000, and now it's lowered to $5,000. And that was true for Winter Storm Uri. The cap for wholesale electricity was $9,000, but in the market's naivety, we never created a price cap for ancillary services. So even though we were only playing the starters in the football game $9,000 during the week, we were actually playing the second and third string quarterbacks $20,000 to $25,000 per megawatt hour. So we were actually paying the reservists because there wasn't a cap on the price at higher prices than the actual starters. All of that financing of just paying for the additional ancillary services is about $2 billion. Again, all that will be uplifted to load over the next 30 years. And those two, that, $2.9 to $3 billion, depending on the interest rate the state gets for the bonds and all that kind of stuff, is going to equate to about 50 cents per megawatt hour for the next 30 years. Since this is obviously a change in law, it's House Bill 4492. The suppliers will absolutely invoke their change in law clauses in their contracts to pass these costs through, especially for the first few months as they're trying to figure out just exactly what these costs will be and how stable will they be going into the future. I suspect that over the next 6 months to a couple years, as these costs become very stable and it's just a financing cost that gets uplifted to the suppliers, you'll start to see suppliers include these in fixed prices going forward. But for right now, the total dollar amounts being financed is uncertain, and the actual interest rate that the state is going to get on these bonds is uncertain. So the total pass-through cost, whether that be 35 cents per megawatt hour or 60 cents per megawatt hour, is also kind of unknown, but it's likely to be in that range of about 45 to 50 cents per megawatt hour. So that's just how we're financing the deregulated side. There's also a bunch of House bills and Senate bills that talk about how the co-ops and the other side of the municipalities and co-ops, their defaults are not included in the uplifts to the deregulated side of the market. It's also billions of dollars on that side that if you are not in a co-op or municipality, you aren't financing those defaults. So that's all the stuff that's happened over the past 6 to 8 months. The future changes that are coming along to ERCOT, the longer term changes that we're likely to see in the ERCOT market are new and additional ancillary services to assist with the growing percentage of non-deployable energy resources. So all of the renewable energy resources that we have, ERCOT and the powers that be realize that they are not as dependable, and we probably need to do a better, more economic solution than just paying so much for all of these second and third string quarterbacks that were just sitting on the sideline and rarely ever starting. They're looking at optimizing that that concept of buying those reserves in a more economical way. But that's definitely going to require changing how we do that. A lot of the rules and how ERCOT has designed procuring these ancillary services, these reserves that we have, are very similar to the things that we started back with 2002. So it's not really a fundamental shift at all, even though our grid has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. So there's definitely talks about how to best procure those services in a new changing of the generation fleet. And then secondary is what's going to be called co-optimization. And you might see some of this written in a supplier contract, but I seriously doubt that this ever makes it as far down to where the retail market knows or thinks about co-optimization. But right now, ERCOT, when they're trying to determine the most economical way to procure electricity to balance the grid, they look at the starters of the football game and the backups in separate algorithms and separate procurement processes. ERCOT for years has wanted to try to optimize that procurement of reserves or backup players and starters into the same equation. So it uses all of the offers from all the generation for both backup services and starter services to figure out what is the best way to procure and balance the system. So that's coming. That's a whole lot of new economic concepts and definitely a lot more algorithms that go into the ERCOT system. So it's slow coming and heavy resources as far as computer resources, but it will likely be coming in the next few years. And then kind of the third big change that will be coming out of a lot of this is just an increased opportunity for load, demand side, y'all, us, to start participating in some of these new ancillary services type market solutions, these wholesale market solutions. So prior, we just really had a demand response, whether it was the ERCOT ERS program or your local TDSB's program for really summertime only demand response. Because ERCOT is realizing that they're going to start to have to change how they're procuring these backup services, and load is the entity that ends up paying for all of these things, they're starting to contemplate ways that load can start providing their own services, meaning be able to reduce their load at specific times and be part of the solution instead of just bearing all the cost that's being passed down to them. So those are lots of words real fast. Those are the kind of the big changes that are changing in ERCOT. A lot of those things, two of these three, they're very different avenues. One is ancillary services, one is wholesale energy, and the other is financing what happened, which is very regulatory, just going to be passed through to you. And then the big overall change of how ERCOT evolves over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years is kind of this slide. So still decent amount of changes coming, but nothing nearly as draconian as moving to a capacity market like some of us were talking about last year, or major market fundamental designs. These are really just small tweaks in the way that ERCOT is performing and its operational nuances, and not some massive system-wide redesign like some we're talking about directly after Uri.
Yep, a lot of great information, Eric. I just wanted to jump in real quick. We had a really good question come in just about one of the pieces you were talking about, the ancillary services, the backup QBs. You know, somebody was asking, did they react? You know, was it overkill? You know, was it a rash decision? You know, will the ancillary service piece, those charges, will those come down over time as ERCOT, as everybody kind of evens this out?
Yes.
I took a stab at answering it. It's going to take some time, right, for that to work itself out in the market.
Yeah, and ERCOT, you know, is basically the arm of regulatory agency. So it's not like they can just change the rules every day as they go. They're not a business that makes the decision of how do I optimize my own business. They are following a very set strict protocol that says this is how we decide we're going to run the state's system.
Right.
So
the quick fix. Right.
There's not a whole lot of, hey, today we're doing this wrong, let's change it tomorrow. It absolutely has this massive chain of authority that approves these changes. So it's a slow changing government type entity that doesn't change things overnight. They realize that this knee-jerk reaction of the over procurement of non-spending reserves was an over procurement, but that's exactly what its intention was to jump in, way over procure, stabilize the market, and not allow any kind of volatility for the rest of this year or in the short term until they can figure out what they need to change that is really more of an optimal market design solution. Lots of words for saying, yes, it's not going to stick around forever. It also means when we're talking to suppliers about fixing these increased ancillary service charges into the contract, if you have a very long-term contract, it may not behoove you to go to the supplier and say, hey, I want to fix these charges. Because as soon as you say, hey, supplier A, instead of passing through an extra $1 per megawatt hour, I want you to tell me what you are willing to fix that for the next 6 years, 8 years in our long-term contract. Well, when you do that, you also remove the right of 6 months, a year later, when those costs are no longer $1 and they're 25 cents, for you saying, hey, I want to try to renegotiate that back down. You've lost kind of some of your bargaining power, and they absolutely don't have to pass through that decreased cost because they took the risk on it.
Right. So as we're explaining, these new charges to asset management, to ownership groups, it's safe to say, hey, this is here for the short term. It could come down in the future. There's no need really to try to fix this. Let's float through it, budget for it, try to get through it as best we can.
Yes, I wouldn't go around trying to fix this one thing because there's more changes coming that will make these obsolete eventually. It's just the timing of those transitions to what is a more optimal solution than the blunt instrument of just going out and hiring 3 or 4 backup quarterbacks.
Perfect.
So that's a lot of what's changing in the ERCOT market. I want to switch to what's going on in Europe because it's the rising tide that lifts all ships in the natural gas market that's having an absolute fundamental change in the underlying cost of energy. That was likely to be more of a long-term shift in overall cost in ERCOT than anything that we're talking about in ERCOT market redesign. So rolling back the videotape a little bit to this fall, there was a lot of conversations going around on Nord Stream 2, which was the new pipeline that Russia was trying to get past that was going to bypass Ukraine. This is Ukraine 2 up here. Nord Stream 2 up here was bypassing Ukraine, which was the major supply of Russian natural gas via pipeline to Europe, and bypass some of Ukraine and start feeding gas into Germany. This is something that the United States has been trying to sanction and trying to fight against for quite some time, years, saying that it doesn't make sense for Europe to continue to increase their exposure to Russian capabilities. We also had at the same time last fall, just a European supply crunch. There was a lot of retirement of nukes in Germany. They had some wind generation that was underperforming and natural gas that just started to get low in their storage. Just like we have natural gas in storage, so does Europe. So they had a supply crunch on natural gas prices coming into the fall. And whether intentionally or just well played into his hands, Putin and Russia started to reduce the amount of natural gas that they were feeding to Europe in the middle of the fall and kind of created a pricing environment that set up very well for a invasion into Ukraine. So I'm not going to go too far into the geopolitical politics and why, but let's just set it up to Europe had an energy crisis going on prior to the invasion that was causing wholesale natural gas prices in Europe to be all-time record highs. And then it's set up well for Russia to invade Ukraine. And since then, we've seen another dramatic increase in natural gas prices. But just to kind of set the table, Russia exports between 150 and 200 billion cubic feet. I mean, billion cubic meters. They talk in meters in Europe. 150 to 200 billion cubic meters of gas, which is the equivalent of 6,000 to 7,000 BCF, or billion cubic feet, on an annual basis going back for the last few years. So that's kind of the quantity of gas that we're talking about when Europe starts talking about weaning themselves off of Russian natural gas. It's 6,000 to 7,000 billion cubic feet. So what has happened to wholesale European natural gas prices over the last few months? In the fall, you saw prices that were, well, in the summer, they were $10 per decatherm in Europe. They got as high as $30 to $60 in the fall, sold off a little bit in late December, and then recently, as recent as last week, got as high as about $70 per decatherm. And then yesterday sold off to about $50, $55 per decatherm. This is the equivalent of about $400 per barrel. And just to give a sense, we're here talking about $4.50 or $5 natural gas prices being some of the highest natural gas prices in the United States that we've seen in the past decade. They're at 5 to 12x our cost of natural gas in Europe. What this has done is obviously put a lot of pressure on all of the economies in Europe to look at alternatives to Russian natural gas. This is putting a significant amount of pressure, but it's not just Europe. It's also Asia and China and everywhere else that's importing LNG. The world has just gone to a supply crunch with LNG, liquefied natural gas, that's caused a lot of these markets to have extremely high prices compared to what we've seen in the United States. What that means for the US is it's a massive arbitrage opportunity. Right now, you can buy gas in Louisiana for $4.50. And if you can put it on a boat, you can sell it in Europe for $50 or $60 or $70. So if you can make a $45 per decatherm arbitrage opportunity, and each of these boats carry 1.5 billion cubic feet of gas, we're obviously going to sell everything we can as fast as we can to these countries where they have gas prices that are 10x what they are ours. The major problem with that solution is we're already maxed out. We're selling every decatherm that we can. We're freezing it, putting on a boat, and shipping it overseas at a record pace. But it's not like we have any spare capacity sitting on the sideline. With an arbitrage opportunity that wide, you wouldn't. This is a chart over the last 5 to 6 years, the amount of LNG capacity that we've built and completed. The blue is online. The green is what's already under construction and planning on coming online in the next few years. We're running right now, our total capacity is about at the high 12s to low 13 billion cubic feet of gas per day is what we can export to LNG. And, which equates to, what is that? What is 13 times 365? 13 times 365, it's about 4,500 BCF a year is about what we can export via LNG. And Russia's exports to Europe is about 6,000 to 7,000 BCF a day. So obviously, we don't have, even if we sent all of our ships, which all of these ships are already accounted for sending gas to other countries like Asia or anywhere else, even if we send all of our LNG to Europe, we don't have enough gas to fill the void of Russia. And just to give a sense of just how much natural gas this is that we're talking about, we're currently exporting about 6,500 BCF of gas. A good chunk of that, kind of the lighter yellow, is what we're exporting via pipelines to Mexico. And then we export about 4,000 BCF a year via LNG. But we also, if you took all of the residential customers and all the commercial customers in the United States, they only consume about 7,900 BCF of gas per year. So the amount of gas that Europe needs to replace Russia gas is equivalent to every residential and every commercial natural gas customer in the United States. So massive amount of gas. We can't fill the gap. We also, just don't have that rosy of a picture right now as far as our natural gas concerns are. This is our inventory levels of natural gas right now. The blue line is the 5-year average. The gray is the 5-year range, and the red is where we currently are. Natural gas, like a lot of other commodities, we consume more in the winter than we make, and in the summer we create more than we consume. So we have inventory levels, just like a gas tank or anything else, right? And where we are on that range of, are we lower than normal for this time of year or higher than normal inventory, has a direct impact on natural gas prices. So going into last winter, we had the red line compared to the blue line. We had about an average quantity of natural gas in storage, as you'd expect for the beginning of winter. Not as high as the 5-year high, which was set the previous year, and not as low as the 5-year low, but a fairly average amount. This year, as we've started to export more and more LNG and had a average size winter, we've dropped down from that 5-year range, and we'll probably end this withdrawal season of natural gas significantly below the 5-year average, but not quite as far down as the 5-year low. So when we extrapolate what might look like over the next 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, the total amount of natural gas that European countries might need if they actually start talking about replacing the natural gas from Russia, one of the most likely spots is obviously the United States. And really the only place that we can or are willing to build LNG export terminals are on the Gulf Coast. And almost all that happens between Corpus Christi, Texas, and New Orleans, Louisiana, with the vast majority of them being right there in the Sabine Pass or the Beaumont area of Texas-Louisiana border. So that's the vast majority of the LNG exports is coming right off of the Texas Gulf Coast. It also means that the vast majority of the natural gas being produced to put on those ships are coming from the Permian Basin in West Texas and the Haynesville play in East Texas. So almost all of the gas that we're going out and creating and producing is not absolutely earmarked, but it's almost earmarked already for an anticipated increased demand in for international supplies. All that kind of wrapped up. It's a lot of economic supply and demand crosses. What that's done to both short-term and long-term natural gas prices over the last few months and weeks is pretty dramatic. This is a chart of the forward calendar years. So I included 2022 through 2028, going back for the past 5 years. And you can see that prior to COVID, you had a natural gas market for all these years that were trading in between $2.50 and $3.50, with a fairly steep increase in 2019 for it buying that next year out in the curve. So every year that went out was another dime-ish more expensive. And then when we got to COVID, we had a 25-year low of spot prices and a complete collapse of forward market prices, where you could buy any year out in the future for about $2.50 a decatherm. Coming out of that, having a decent amount of economic recovery, but a very slow increase in production because most of these producers had extreme capital hardships and wiped out balance sheets. They were looking for prices to recover before they produced. You saw a nice steady increase through the first half of 2021, followed by this building of fear in the European market that was causing a pretty rapid increase in the fall of natural gas prices, specifically short-term natural gas prices. So 2022 had a whole lot of volatility in the fall, whereas just the last few months, you've seen all of these outer years since the invasion in Ukraine have a dramatic increase. When you kind of zoom in to just these outer years, got rid of 22, 23, 24, and looked at just 25 through 28. Since February, they were all trading between $3 and $3.20. They've all increased 20 to 50 cents. Now they're trading about $3.50 to $3.60 with a pretty steady increase. So that's the market's reaction to there's likely going to be a significant increase in demand for domestic natural gas beyond 2024, when we can actually start having some of these new LNG terminals that are being inked and discussed right now with all these European countries and European energy companies actually be built and start exporting gas in the next 3 to 4 years. So wrapping all of that up into what that's doing to electricity prices, same type chart. You can see a dramatic correlation. You see 2023 rising significantly. So this was Winter Storm Uri about this time. So you see a market that was relatively flat have a nice sizable jump up for Winter Storm Uri, and then a natural gas market through 2021 that was rising and causing the markets to rise a little bit. And then since January of this year, that rising natural gas market, along with the accumulation of the changes in how ERCOT is reducing the ORDC but increasing the frequency, all that kind of stuff just being the rising tide that lifts all ships in the wholesale electricity market. So all things pointing very bullish to wholesale natural gas prices and wholesale electricity prices in ERCOT. What that means specifically to you, when you break this forward curve down to the actual months, the blue line here is where you could have bought wholesale electricity prices back on the last day of January in 2021. So looking, through the balance of 2021, 22, 23, that was the wholesale forward curve. These spikes are August, and these small little mounds are the winters, January and February. So that was what you could buy wholesale power for before Uri. And then the black line is the current market prices. And yes, significant increase in the short term on wholesale electricity prices in the summer. But once you get out beyond 2025, the summertime prices, they're increased a little bit because of natural gas prices increase, but not significant. What you're seeing is a major increase in both next year and entirely out the curve of the premium of winter power prices in Texas. That is a combination of all of these things together, a rising natural gas market and a increased probability or fear of higher electricity prices because of all the things going on in ERCOT. What that means most for commercial real estate buildings is the vast majority of commercial real estate buildings in North Texas are heated with electricity. So your predominant electricity use is the winter months, just because the nature of how you consume electricity. So when you see electricity prices from last year that we're trading at $25 for wholesale power in the winter of 2023, now trading closer to $60, that's greater than 2x increase in cost. That's absolutely going to have a significant impact in the overall cost that you could go out and buy a fixed price power contract for, or the probability of higher index prices if you were taking power prices on index. So obviously lots of things going on, both in ERCOT, Texas domestically and internationally, that's causing a whole lot of volatility in the ERCOT power market. So that's it for slides. This is just Q&A. I know I've right up on the hour. So I'll let y'all decide how many questions or what we want to do next.
Yeah, great information, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Ben, yeah, great information. Lots of good information. Very timely, since we're all starting to get letters and notifications about the increases. So we're open for questions. If anybody has any questions for Eric or Ben, please put them in the Q&A.
A lot of information to digest. Eric, one thing that maybe if you don't mind pointing out for the group, that how the curves backward dated, maybe define that for the group real quick, if you don't mind. I know we get that question a lot, market backwardation, what that means for us here in Texas.
Sure, let me go back one slide and we'll talk about backwardation. So backwardation is just an economic term when you're describing a forward curve in really the slope of that forward curve. So backwardation means that as you go out the forward curve, the prices are declining or downward sloping. So you could look at this curve and say over the next 5 years, the summertime prices and the wintertime prices in ERCOT have a steep backwardated curve, which just means you could buy 2024 cheaper than you can buy 2023, or 2026 cheaper than you can buy 2025. The opposite of backwardation is contango, which is how most financial markets look. You know, if you wanted to look at a 5-year interest rate versus a 10-year versus a 15, they're typically upward sloping, meaning somebody is most of the time willing to sell a commodity 5 years from now more expensive than they will 2 years from now or 10 years from now more expensive, just because the cost of money and cost of carry, etc. So a normal commodity market is contango or upward sloping. Right now, the ERCOT market and the natural gas market is both backwardated, meaning the market is expecting prices to be cheaper in the future than they are right now. At least that's what the market is willing to sell you those commodities for. We've seen a backwardated market in ERCOT for the last 4 or 5 years, as the market was anticipating more and more renewables would continue to push down wholesale electricity prices. We've seen a dramatic shift in where the market sees the risk of the electricity market in Texas, which is why those winter prices have jumped so much. If the short-term prices hadn't moved up as much as they were, then we'd see a contango market in the forwards, as the forwards would be more expensive. But right now, with all the volatility in the short-term power market in Texas and with what's going on in Europe, the front half of the curve has moved up so dramatically that the curve is still in a slight backwardation or downward sloping. Just means it's still discounted in the future. Even all the things that I told you about, the things that could go wrong in increasing demand of natural gas, the market still, at least for now, sees the future being brighter than today, or at least cheaper.
Yep. I had a couple questions come in the Q&A. One is, do we have a one pager? We do have some information. Hard to condense it into one page, but we do.
Yeah.
So we can share that with folks that need it.
There's probably a lot of one pagers on these specific topics. Like, there's definitely a one pager. A lot of your suppliers are sending out one pagers that are talking about the changes in the ancillary service market and why they're changing through, or securitization. It also has a lot of legalese in it. So almost all of that one pager is taken up with legalese, but we can absolutely kind of boil this down into the major bullet points.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then another question about budgeting, and we can absolutely help with estimating your budgets based on these increases that are coming. We know the ancillary costs, roughly what they're going to look like for folks. There's still that secondary piece, the securitization piece, right, Eric? That
right.
Still kind of unknown, but it's going to be relatively smaller than the ancillary piece.
And that's fairly easy to ballpark, just assuming, you know, a normal interest rate and the fact that you're going to finance $3 billion over 15 years. You know, any of us could put that into a mortgage calculator and figure out what your monthly payments would be. So that's not too hard of math. It's really, is that going to be, you know, 35 cents per megawatt hour or 55 cents is probably your range. So it's fairly easy to narrow that down into something that at least gives you a decent sense.
Yep. So yeah, we can definitely help with those if needed. Let's see here. We got another question. Eric, so if we were in a backwardated curve, wouldn't it be better to wait as long as possible before locking in a long-term fixed rate?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is probably the part that is the counter to that question. So yes, the market is backwardated, meaning each of these forward years are cheaper as you go out in time. The problem is it's a rising backwardated market. So today the price is more expensive than it was yesterday, and yesterday the price was more expensive than it was a week ago. So yes, the future is cheaper than the present, but the future is rising. Right. So right now, if you were to wait another week and this trend continues, the next week will be more expensive than it is today. That's the part where I don't want to say it's going to absolutely continue to rise. Who knows what a market's going to do? There's way too much volatility for me to say this is exactly what's going to happen. But right now, with all the things that are going on in the world, it looks like the likelihood of Texas and the United States being a major supply point for European natural gas needs is highly likely. So the demand for our fuel, the things that we're keeping at a very cheap price. One of the reasons why energy prices in the United States and Texas have been as cheap as they are is because we have very cheap natural gas prices. With the massive arbitrage opportunity between us and the rest of the world, and the rest of the world wanting to buy our very cheap natural gas, that that arbitrage opportunity should balance out, which should increase prices here domestically. So yes, it's backwardated, but it's a rising backwardated market,
Yeah.
which is, it's like inflation. If the prices
Right.
are rising, it's more expensive tomorrow than it is today.
Yeah, great question there, and good answer. Eric's going to be at the BOMA Southwest Region Conference, talking about some of this and more at an education session. So if you're interested in learning more about that, and I'm sure plenty will happen between now and mid-April, we'll have plenty to talk about then. Eric, really appreciate you doing this for us, and Janet and team with BOMA, really appreciate the opportunity. I know we're running out of time here. But thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Yes, Ben, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will have several other coffee and chats throughout the year. Just a couple of reminders that March is BOMA Greater Dallas PAC Month, and this is an election year. So support candidates for office who are friendly to commercial real estate by donating to the BOMA Greater Dallas Political Action Committee on our BOMA Greater Dallas website. Remember, there's a luncheon next week and the BOMA Southwest Region Conference where you can hear Eric again speak. And registration is on the BOMA Greater Dallas website. Hope to see everybody there. And on behalf of the Government Affairs Committee, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Eric.